You already know what time it is. Welcome back in to the NFL with AJL, episode 64. We're live on a Tuesday. You could have been anywhere else in the world, but you're right here tapped in with me on the show. Hope everyone's had a great week so far. February, yes, is officially underway, so hope you guys are crushing the month as we get through it in 2024. Hope everyone's had a great Tuesday as well. We're live at about 7:40 on a Tuesday, usually at 7, but wanted to make sure I was prepped for the show and make sure we were all set up and everything. Before we get into the show tonight, y'all make sure to like and share the stream. Wherever you may be watching, subscribe on YouTube. Of course, we were at 792 last Tuesday. We're now at 826, I believe, so that's 34 subs in just a week. You guys are absolutely awesome. Best community out there. Again, the content would not be what it is without you guys supporting me. Again, like and share that stream, whether you're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or X now, Twitch. Hit the bell so you never miss a post. Also, of course, that QR code in the corner of the screen is going to give you every bit of social media and podcast content available at the NFL with AJL. Hashtag the NFL with AJL. Anyone that's listened to the podcast, I know I was gone a few weeks ago because our cat Java got out. We've seen her over the past few nights on our camera, so now we're just playing the cat and mouse game with our kitty cat. Of course, wanted to update you guys if anyone was curious if she's come back yet. Again, if you know me, if you know my lady, the babies, the fur babies are our absolute children. But on tonight's show, episode 64, Super Bowl 58 top 10 players, matchups, the prediction for the game, Seahawks, Commanders, Pittsburgh Steelers, new hires, the Who Dat Corner, and much more here on the show. So let's jump right into the top. Let's go off the top with the Super Bowl 58 talk. I actually had it moved to the end of the show. Didn't align the lineup before I went live, but hey, it's all good. It's my show. I can move it around as I need to. So let's start right off the top with the top 10 players in Super Bowl 58. We'll go from 10 to 1. And of course, as we get to the top of the list, you guys will be able to tell who I did leave out of these rankings. There's a lot of great players in this Super Bowl. What if we're talking about the 10 best? I'll start with number 10, L'Jarius Sneed, a great lockdown corner. We see what he's become in that Kansas City Chiefs defense. We also see how Steve Spagnuolo over the last 3-4 years with this Kansas City team has made this an elite defense, and L'Jarius Sneed has been a big part of that. We see him punch the ball out against Zay Flowers in the AFC Championship. That was a game-saving, season-saving, possible Super Bowl ticket punching defensive MVP type of play. And I think L'Jarius Sneed is going to have a great impact in this Super Bowl. I'm excited to see the type of plays and coverages that are drawn up for him. And I think we'll see another highlight play from this guy here. At number 9, give me Deebo Samuel. Of course, the Swiss Army knife for, I almost said the Kansas City 49ers, the San Francisco 49ers. We know he can be that rushing, that receiving threat. Hell, we've even seen him throw a pass or two in his NFL career. One of Brock Purdy's favorite targets. We know Kyle Shanahan likes to get him implemented into the game plan for the San Francisco 49ers, and I fully expect Deebo Samuel to have some touches. And call me crazy, if the Niners do win this Super Bowl, Deebo Samuel has a good case at being Super Bowl MVP. At number 8, give me Chris Jones, a guy who did miss the first few snaps of the season, obviously missed the first game along with Travis Kelce, but now he and the Kansas City Chiefs are here at the end of everything in the Super Bowl. 10.5 sacks on the year, still one of the most double-team guys in the league, still at the tops of the league in pressures as well, quarterback hits, tackles for loss. We know what Chris Jones is capable of, and with him being on that defensive line with a guy like George Karlaftis, with a guy like Drew Tranquill in, behind him in the linebacking core, Chris Jones is going to have some effect in this Super Bowl. At number 7, give me basically his counterpart on the flip side of the ball, defensive end, if you will, in Nick Bosa, the reigning defensive player of the year. Of course, we know what he wanted after TJ Watt did a couple of years back. Also 10.5 sacks for Nick Bosa. Very well in pressures, very well in tackles for loss, quarterback hits also. Definitely expect to see Nick Bosa get double teamed by this Kansas City offensive line, which does have one of the best in the league. I want to say they're top 3 in terms of least amount of sacks given up on their quarterback, Patrick Mahomes. And we know what Nick Bosa is capable of. He's been in plenty of NFC title games. He's been in the Super Bowl before. He's been a defensive player of the year. And we know what that last name sports, especially when you play in the biggest game of the NFL season. At number 6, give me George Kittle, tight end for the Niners. Of course, we know how lethal he is. We know he can be a big force in the run block game, in the pass block game. He can also seep out. He's one of the greatest receiving tight ends we've ever seen. Definitely one of the better tight ends in the NFL since he's come in, and especially in this season as well. It's been no different. And we're going to see Brock Purdy look for him in this Super Bowl. If George Kittle goes off and has a big game, I'm not necessarily shocked by that because we know what George Kittle is capable of. At number 5, give me Fred Warner, maybe the best linebacker in the NFL. We know he can cover. We know he can blitz. We know he's the captain of that San Francisco 49ers team, going to be having people rallying around him, going to also have him calling those defensive schemes and defensive lineups, those adjustments on the field, as we've seen him do over his career. There's a reason he is an elite guy. There's a reason he's the best at his position. And there's also a reason that the Niners have him in that linebacking core because we've seen in the past with a Alden Smith, possibly with a Navarro Bowman. They want to keep that same type of culture. And I believe when Fred Warner came in, they saw a lot of that in him. So the 10 through the 5, L'Jarius Sneed at 10, Debo at 9, Chris Jones at 8, Nick Bosa at 7, George Kittle at 6, Fred Warner at 5. Now let's get to the top 4. Trent Williams is going to come in at number 4. No sacks allowed this year. I know he only played 15 of the 17 possible games. He did start all 15 games. He was in no sacks allowed. All but 2 games, as I just mentioned, played this season, which is going to show a testament to his longevity. Clearly, when he came over for the Niners, a few years back, that was one of their best additions. He is their best offensive lineman, and I don't think there's a debate as to if he can or can't be the best lineman in this Super Bowl. I personally think that he is. Creed Humphrey does have a possible, case as well, but he does have 4 sacks given up on the year. I will give credit to Creed Humphrey, though. He's not in my top 10, but he did have almost 1,100 offensive snaps, which was tied for 9th best in the NFL. But yes, Trent Williams at number 4, he's going to be tasked with that, with that Chris Jones coming around on the back end with a George Karlaftis if they do want to bring in Tranquill or maybe Snead or McDuffie on one of those cornerback blitzes. But Trent Williams, I believe overall, will have a good game. At number 3, Travis Kelce. We understand what Travis Kelce is. Him and Patrick Mahomes already combining for the most postseason quarterback tight end duo touchdowns. I want to say it might even be just quarterback receiver touchdowns in general in postseason history, but we know he's over Brady and Gronk, at least for that quarterback to tight end duo for touchdowns in the postseason. We've seen Travis Kelce have some big Super Bowls. We've seen Travis Kelce be very good in these playoffs and in most playoff games that he's been in. It makes it very easy when Patrick Mahomes is your quarterback, and I don't think there's going to be any differences here for what is going to be expected of Travis Kelce. At number 2, give me Christian McCaffrey, an MVP candidate, arguably the best running back in the league. We know he can run it. We know that he can be a receiving threat as well. 21 total touchdowns for Christian McCaffrey this year, leading rusher in the NFL for Christian McCaffrey this year, in that MVP conversation, which is very rare that we see that type of running back in the MVP conversation. Last running back we see win MVP was Adrian Peterson, coming back from the ACL, and I think he was undoubtedly the best player in the league that year, and his return was just very, very unprecedented. So Christian McCaffrey at number 2, I think he's going to have plenty of touches in this game. Look for Kyle Shanahan to get him involved early and often, and to give the Chiefs plenty of fits. And at number 1, the best player in the NFL, the gentleman who should win the NFL MVP award over Lamar Jackson. I said it on my channel. I said it on the last episode. Patrick Mahomes. We understand everything that Patrick Mahomes is. We know he's elite. We know he's one of the few, if not the only one, that can play his exact style of football. We know he's chasing Tom Brady's greatness as well. We know that he is under that tutelage of Andy Reid, and he has driven this team back to their 4th Super Bowl in 5 years, has a chance to go back-to-back, has a chance to have 3 Super Bowl wins before the age of 30, and really be in that GOAT discussion. Quick side note, want to give him that respect for saying he's not even halfway close to Brady. Talk to me 15 years down the line, and we'll see what I'm actually doing. So Mahomes understands he's got to go get those records in terms of rings, in terms of passing yards, passing touchdowns, even completions, I believe. But he also has to have the longevity, the entire body of work, playing until I'd say at least 37, 38, not 49, 39. But we're going to talk about Patrick Mahomes chasing Tom Brady's greatness on the next episode, episode 65, which will come on Friday, just a couple of days before the Super Bowl. So the top 10 players going into this Super Bowl: number 1, Mahomes; number 2, Christian McCaffrey; number 3, George Kittle; 4, Trent Williams; 5, Fred Warner; 6, George Kittle; 7, Nick Bosa; 8, Chris Jones; 9, Debo Samuel; and 10, give me L'Jarius Sneed. I wanted to throw a possible Isaiah Pacheco in there, of course, a Trent McDuffie as well. But with the way L'Jarius Sneed has been able to force these turnovers, especially within the AFC Championship game, want to give that nod to him. Brock Purdy. I know Brock Purdy's not here on the top 10 list. I do believe Purdy is a very good player, but when you look at the talent that he's stacked up against and how he does have that benefit of being around all that talent and basically being that, not being rude system quarterback with San Francisco, it's going to have me exclude him on his top 10 list. Now let's get into Super Bowl 58 matchups / X factors. I think really the X factors are the top 10 players that I named there. So let's talk about some matchups that I'm going to keep my eyes on. I think matchup that people might overlook is this is going to be a battle of defenses. We're talking about the second and third best defense in the NFL in terms of points per game given up. They're both in the top 10 in terms of yards per game, but I really like to focus on that points per game stat because we know you can put up yards, but if you're not scoring in the end zone and if you're not allowing people to score, if they get down in your red zone and you're holding them to field goals, it's going to make you that much better of a defense. We've got a Steve Wilks. I want to be sure there. I want to say that Steve Wilks with the Niners. Yep. So we've got a Steve Wilks led defense versus a Steve Spagnuolo defense, two of the best defensive minds in the NFL. Again, second and third best defense in points. And, I think this is going to be a low scoring affair. I'm going to give you my final score prediction once we get to the end of the Super Bowl 58 segment here. But both of these defenses are going to be great. It's going to be a defensive squabble, just like I said in the AFC Championship game. And I think the Chiefs are equipped for that. They understand that there's not going to be a lot of points in this game. Points are going to be at a premium. And again, when you have a L'Jarius Sneed, a Drew Tranquill, a Trent McDuffie, a Chris Jones, George Karlaftis versus a Fred Warner, you're going to have a Nick Bosa. I didn't even mention Chase Young. I don't believe Chase Young is a top 10 player in the Super Bowl, but he will definitely be an X factor. Give me some more Niners defensive players. Drawing a blank on them, but of course we name them here, in the segment. We've talked about the Niners as a team all year, so definitely see both of these defenses having a tough time. Not a tough time. It's going to be a good matchup of both of these defenses going up against each other. But more than anything, I'm interested in seeing Brock Purdy versus arguably the best defense in the NFL, in the best game of the NFL, in the biggest game of his career. Throw that Mr. Irrelevant stuff out of the window. You just gave us 4,200 yards, 31 touchdowns, 11 picks, over 100 passer rating. You're in the Super Bowl. You were the 1 seed. We got to throw all that out the window now. Brock Purdy's here. He's in this major game. And I think Brock Purdy going up against this Kansas City Chiefs defense is going to tell us a lot about who he actually can be. Because even though that Lions defense wasn't great in the NFC Championship game, which it was not, they still mounted that 17-point comeback. I think that was more on the shoulders of the Lions fumbling the bag than it was the Niners getting themselves back into that game. But what is Brock Purdy going to be against Steve Spagnuolo? He's going to have way more talent at his disposal than Patrick Mahomes does. Will he be able to find that Kittle? Will he be able to implement that CMC, find the check down, look for the Debo or Ayuk out in the field, be able to take off and scramble with it like he did in the AFC Championship game? This is the best defense Brock Purdy's going to play in the biggest game of his career to have one of the biggest accomplishments in his career, and I'm excited to see it. Travis Kelce and Fred Warner. I remember a couple of years ago when the Bucs and the Chiefs went to the Super Bowl, I said, I'm going to look for Levante David and Devin White to be able to contain Travis Kelce. And Travis Kelce still had over his 100 yards, even though the Chiefs got blown out in that game due to no offense. But I think Travis Kelce and Fred Warner are going to have their hands full. And even Travis Kelce, let me just say, Travis Kelce versus that linebacking core. Fred Warner, we know Drew Tranquill is going to be in there. And how they're able to manipulate Travis Kelce, getting him in those tight coverages, being able to throw him off his spot, getting a hand into the pass that Mahomes is going to have a very slim window to throw that football into in the Super Bowl. This is going to be a big matchup to watch because if Travis Kelce gets going, if there's 11 targets for 11 catches over 100 yards and a touchdown, the Niners are going to have a long day. The Ravens essentially had a long day. They just tailored Kelce back, and he wasn't as potent as the game went on. But every time the ball was thrown his way, he caught it. He had a couple of clutch catches, catching across his body, catching over in the corner of the end zone. If the Niners don't figure out how to get Kelce off his spot, along with Mahomes as well, which the pass rush is going to be major, that's why I mentioned the defenses, it's going to be a long day for San Francisco. I also think Fred Warner and that linebacking core are going to have their hands full with a Christian McCaffrey. Again, we know he can receive it. We know he can rush it. We know he's a touchdown machine. Only 2 total turnovers on the year, 3 fumbles, 2 of them lost. He takes care of the football very, very well. And if Christian McCaffrey gets going, it could be a long day for the Chiefs also. I think both of these defenses are going to be able to hold these star players in check, and I believe it will come down to possible turnover. I hate to sound so recitative or, feel like I'm reciting the same thing here on the episodes. But when you have these tight games, when you have these defenses that go up against each other, it's going to have to be turnovers. We saw that the Ravens lose the turnover battle, and the score might not indicate it, but the Ravens got outplayed pretty heavily in the last game. Now, the Chiefs didn't score anything, but in the same breath, they possibly didn't have to because they had a 10-point lead. Back to Fred Warner and really this linebacking core versus Christian McCaffrey. If Christian McCaffrey can get on some of those Texas routes, some of those screens, some of those slip routes, maybe after throwing a block, we know that he's a walking one-play touchdown, just like we used to say and still say with Tyreek Hill in Miami and when Tyreek Hill was with the Kansas City Chiefs as well. And there's plenty more matchups that we could go over, but these are our main ones. The last one here, the Chiefs secondary versus that Niners passing game. Kittle, Ayuk, and Debo, there's more weapons, I feel like, in totality, even though Mahomes and Kelsey are very great. Outside of them, yeah, you got Pacheco, which I'll argue he's the third part of the trio, but Rashee Rice, MVS, Kadarius Toney, Miko Hardman, Noah Gray, Blake Bell, not necessarily a whole lot of offense. I feel like that not a whole lot of offensive talent that the Niners are going to have to worry about, more of the offensive schemes and play calling with the blessing of Big Red and Andy Reid and obviously the master executioner in Patrick Mahomes. But George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Debo Samuel versus L'Jarius Sneed, Trent McDuffie, Drew Tranquill. Will the Niners passing game be too much for the Chiefs secondary? I don't think so. Again, I think this is going to be a stalemate. If each quarterback has 185 yards passing, if that, maybe they get to 225 or 230, which I feel like anytime you break 200 yards in a game and your last name is Mahomes, Allen, Herbert, Hurts, Burrow, you're going to get praise. Will it be an extravagant game by their standards? No. But if Patrick Mahomes doesn't have a lot of, passing yards or attempts, but he comes out with that Super Bowl win and more than likely that Super Bowl MVP, depending on how the game goes, then no one's really going to bat an eye. But will that Chiefs secondary, again, with a guy who can, force turnovers in big spots like the L'Jarius Sneed, with a Trent McDuffie who became an All-Pro, with a Drew Tranquill in that linebacking core, even Christian McCaffrey with this passing game here, along with Kittle, Ayuk, and Debo. I think it's going to be a lot of play calling mismatches. And again, we're talking about the biggest game of the year. We're talking about, arguably the two best head coaches in the NFL. Of course, we don't have John Harbaugh here. We don't have Mike Tomlin and some of the other great names out there. But what will each of these defenses do to throw the other team's offense off? My final score prediction for this game, give me Kansas City to 2-peat. Yes, they're going back to back. Patrick Mahomes will probably bring home that Super Bowl MVP. He'll have 3 rings in 4 years. He will have 3 Super Bowl MVPs. Arguably, you can say he should win his 3rd MVP. Big Red will get his win. I've got the Chiefs winning 24-21. And I believe the media and all the questions about Kyle Shanahan being a long-term guy in San Francisco, despite how great he's been, will they be able to get him over the hump? Because it's just like when we talk about the Steelers. What is your standard? Is it making the playoffs in the NFC Championship every year? With the Steelers, is it just having a winning season? Is it getting bounced in the first round? Or is it getting to the mountaintop and finishing the job? And we know how hard this is in the NFL. We know it's very hard to win in this league. We know it's very hard to win the Super Bowl. And this is Kyle Shanahan's 3rd. Kyle Shanahan's 3rd Super Bowl in 8 years, if I'm not mistaken. We had the Falcons in 2016. We had the Chiefs in 2019. Excuse me. He went with the Falcons in 2016, the Niners in 2019, and then he's going with the Niners again this year. But he's been to the NFC Championship plenty of times. Give me the Chiefs 24-21 in Super Bowl 58. Arthur Smith was hired by the Pittsburgh Steelers. Kind of a shocking hire to me. I believe Arthur Smith, a lot of people are crediting him with the good offenses, not great, the good offenses that he had with the Tennessee Titans, because it did feel like a little bit of a lightning in a bottle moment. Of course, to see not Mike Vrabel come in. I'm thinking of different head coaching positions, but we see Arthur Smith have that offense with the Tennessee Titans, with the Jonnu Smith, with the Derrick Henry, and he did create some good offenses over there. And maybe the head coaching spot wasn't for him in Atlanta, but his offense did not transfer over to Atlanta. And you could say that he had much more young talent, maybe not elite, but young, coachable talent. He had a record of 21-30 with the Atlanta Falcons. And I just sit here and wonder, why did the Pittsburgh Steelers go this route when Arthur Smith hasn't shown any offensive capability the last 3 seasons. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Arthur Smith's offense with the Atlanta Falcons, with a Bijan, with a Drake London, with a Kyle Pitts, with a Tyler Algier. Think he had a little bit of Calvin Ridley in his stint there, but we know Calvin's been just now first year back in the league, had to serve that whole suspension. He was traded away. So yeah, he had a little bit of a Calvin Ridley. His offense in the 3 years of the 3 straight 7 and 10 years with the Atlanta Falcons was not better than Dan Quinn's offense in his last 3 years in Atlanta. And outside of the 2 years that Dan Quinn had of great, 8-8 and then 11, or excuse me, I think he went 11-6 and then 10-6. See, they lose, or 11-5 and then 10-6. You see, they lose the Super Bowl and then they lose in the wild card, I believe, or was it the divisional to Philly? I can't quite remember. Got a lot going on up here. But Arthur Smith didn't have a great offense in his recent years in the NFL. And we do see some roster similarities, right? We see, I'm going to say TJ Warren, Jalen Warren. And is that right? I believe it is Jalen Warren, right? Yes, Jaylen. Okay, just wanted to be sure. We see Jalen Warren and Najee Harris. We see George Pickens. We see Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, whenever he's going to be able to get healthy and get on the field. We know how much of a beast he was coming into the draft at the tight end position. And then you look in Atlanta. There was a Kyle Pitts who is, I'd say better than the two if he was used better in terms of Freiermuth and Darnell. Drake London have that comparison to that George Pickens. Also, Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, that running back duo in Atlanta, just like there's that running back duo over with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I feel like the Steelers kind of stay stuck with this move because Matt Canada got worse every year as more talent came in through these drafts and these player acquisitions with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the Steelers' standards and the expectations never went anywhere. And Arthur Smith's offense under Dave Ragone for the last 3 years as offensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons, it wasn't better than Dirk Cutter's. It wasn't better than Steve Sarkisian's, and it damn sure wasn't better than Kyle Shanahan's. I feel like people are giving Arthur Smith too much credit for when he locked down Lamar Jackson in the divisional. And Lamar Jackson had 500 all-purpose yards, even though the Titans won, I think it was 26-12 in that game. You could tell from the first few snaps that the Titans were going to win that game. And their defense played very well, but I think a lot of people were giving Arthur Smith let me retract that because that sounded kind of silly. Not the fact that he disgruntled Lamar because Mike Vrabel was still there and we know he's a defensive guy, but the play calling that let them put up 26 points on that vaunted Baltimore Ravens defense and just that vaunted team in general, sporting the talent that they did. The Ravens felt like a lock that year to win the Super Bowl. And it's kind of like we're going to talk about a little later on in the show. Whenever you are on a team that has a high level of success, you're going to get credit for that team's overall success, and rightfully so. But you do have to be a little careful and ask yourself, was it really that offensive coordination in Tennessee that possibly trounced the Baltimore Ravens? And will that translate over to the Falcons? Because it didn't. Arthur Smith never won more than 7 games. And the last time he took the field, he had a 48-piece put up on his head by my New Orleans Saints with a 17-piece in response from his offense. I don't understand the Steelers. Like, do the Steelers think he's going to turn the clock back 4 or 5 years to get back to that great offense that Tennessee was? Because the league's changed a lot since then. Ryan Tannehill's better than Kenny Pickett or Mason Rudolph or Duck Hodges. Now, yes, again, you have even kind of comparable rosters from Tennessee to Atlanta. And obviously, if Atlanta's comparable to Tennessee, then it's going to be comparable to the Steelers where he's at now. Again, Warren and Najee, Pickens, Freiermuth and Darnell. He had Kyle Pitts. He had Drake London. He had Bijan, Tyler Algier. He had A.J. Brown with the Titans. He had Derrick Henry. He had Jonnu Smith. So it kind of feels like a comfort hire here for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But I just sit here and ask the question of, this was really their best move? There were so many offensive coordinator candidates that moved positions this year. Dan Pitcher, we saw he got promoted, if I'm not mistaken. I believe he got promoted. He didn't go to a different team. Kellen Moore, Zach Robinson. Plenty of guys out here. plenty of offensive coordinator positions that were either promoted or those guys moved to head coach. And Arthur Smith was your best solution. And I read the report. Mike Tomlin wanted to be able to look at a guy and, quote, feel comfortable with the track record that they were looking at. So you kind of just admitted it there. This was a comfort move. You think a guy in Arthur Smith is really going to revive all of this offensive talent that you have? Because the defense is fine. Mike Tomlin and the defensive coordinator have that on lock. And more than not, it's probably Mike Tomlin. Yes, it's an upgrade over Matt Canada, but how much are you really saying for a guy in Matt Canada that never really had the Steelers over a top 20 offense in yards or points? And Arthur Smith's stats with the 3 years with the Falcons are arguably the same. I get it. He never had the quarterback right. I get it. They were still looking for that. Steelers are still looking for a quarterback as well. I believe they should go get Russell Wilson. I think that would be a great pairing. Arthur Smith and Russell Wilson feels like they can make something happen. That would be Arthur's best quarterback he's had under his tutelage. Yes, I'm going to take Russ and now over the talent that Ryan Tannehill had in the lightning in a bottle year, because we know what Tannehill's been for most of his career. He just landed in a good spot. Russ, with his entire body of work, has been much better than Pickett or Tannehill. So that could be special. But I was just a little shocked with this move. I expected better of the Steelers. Again, so many offensive coordinator candidates that move positions this year, and Arthur Smith was your choice. But I want to hear from y'all down in the chat, down in the comments. Let me know your thoughts on Arthur Smith being hired by the Steelers, the Super Bowl 58 players, matchups, and predictions that we just threw your way. And now we're moving on into Mike Macdonald was hired as the next Seattle Seahawks head coach. They hired their 9th head coach in franchise history. It comes off the back of course, the last 14 years of Pete Carroll being with the franchise. And if I'm just being honest, this felt like a real vintage Seattle Seahawks hire, right? This guy was a former defensive coordinator at Michigan. We know Seattle loves their defense. Look at what Pete Carroll was when he came in. He's the youngest coach in NFL history at 36 years old. We know he had a role in those early UGA defenses in UGA defenses in the early 2010s, being the defensive quality control coach, being some assistant coach is as well. And now he was with the Ravens for 6 years before going to the defensive coordinator position at Michigan, like I just mentioned. He led arguably the best defense in the NFL the last 2 seasons, and this guy is young. A lot of people were saying Pete Carroll, 72 years old, has a game moved past him? Does he have the right mindset to be able to get the Seahawks to success? We saw what he kind of did with Geno Smith, but we're also going to give some of that credit to Shane Waldron because he was at that offensive coordinator position. We know Pete is defense, defense, defense. He had the #1 defense in points for 4 straight years. That was the Legion of Boom. That was the Pete Carroll era that we came to know and love. The Seahawks need to get youthful, and the Seahawks just got very youthful with this move here. And we see the Ravens last year. They led the NFL in scoring defense, so points per game, 16.5 per game. 60 sacks, led the league, and they were tied for first. I'm going to say they led the league in takeaways at 31. They were the first team in league history to rank first in all 3 of those categories, and they were 6th in yards at 301.4 yards per game, which even then that sounds crazy, but that's just the offense that the NFL puts up nowadays. Don't that sound like a not prodigy of Pete Carroll, but that sounds like something Pete Carroll did back in the day. He is responsible. He is getting all that credit for the best defense in the NFL over the last 2 years. Nobody allowed more points than them. Nobody got to the quarterback and sacked the quarterback more than them. And nobody took the ball away more than them. First team in league history to rank first in all 3 of those categories. That just screams Pete Carroll-esque to me. And this was a good hire. I am on the regime of course, we see a guy like Mike Vrabel. Of course, we see a guy like D'Amico Ryans, see a guy like John Harbaugh, but those are anomalies. Most of the great to elite teams in this league are offensively driven. And that's what I wanted to see here for the Seattle Seahawks, because I believe they do have some talent in the DK Metcalfs and the Tyler Lockett's of the world. Geno Smith could very well bounce back, but I believe that was just more of a comeback player of the year scenario. Now, he could bounce back, but I don't necessarily, see it here. Seattle's been loyal to Pete Carroll, for the last 14 years. So they really went out and hired someone that was very similar to him, just with no head coaching experience. And we know that there's always a gamble in that. I'm not going to be upset at Seattle for going out and getting a guy that doesn't have any head coaching experience because you got to start somewhere. And his track record over what he's done, again, former DC at Michigan, played a role in those early 2010s defenses with Georgia. We remember the guys that were over on those squads in the terms of Jarvis Jones and the other great pass rushers and cornerbacks that were present on those teams. But, in when they turn around and start to look at the offensive coordinator position, which they still do have to fill that role, I think someone similar to Darrell Bevel or even a Marty Schottenheimer would be ideal for offensive coordinator. Those were the best offenses in recent memory came under those guys, and of course Shane Waldron as well. And they do have a good history of offensive coordinators hires lately, so I do give them faith that they will be able to bring in the right staff. Mike Macdonald will pinpoint the right guys, and there was a couple of teams that Mike Macdonald could have went to. There was the rumors of the Commanders. Of course, the Seahawks were on the table. We didn't know who maybe the Falcons were going to go pick up, but we knew that most of the interest was between, I believe, the Seahawks and the Commanders. And, you know, the Commanders already kind of spoiled it with Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson said it seemed like they were more basketball guys than football guys, and he just withdrew his name from the search, and he went to be the OC for the Lions again. And now we have Mike Macdonald. Probably didn't like what he heard there, and Seattle's a better situation than, Washington. Maybe not by much, depending on who you ask, but I still think it's a very good situation. Again, I would have liked an offensive-minded hire, especially after being defensively driven for the better part of Pete Carroll's era, which was 14 years. We saw what he did with the Legion of Boom. But I think the future is bright for the Seattle Seahawks. I think that they went out and got, again, a young guy who's very reputable. He's got that newer, more modern age of that football mindset and approach to the game. And I think that's going to be great for them because when you've had a, guy in his late 50s, now going through his entire 60s and even in his early 70s being with the Seattle Seahawks, I give all the respect to Pete Carroll. He won a Super Bowl. He took them to back-to-back ones. And short of a horrible play call, he could be the last guy that we're talking about right now to have back-to-back Super Bowl wins in the NFL. So Mike Macdonald to the Seattle Seahawks as their newest head coach. I want to hear from you guys, though. 12 Nation Seahawks fans, the 12th man. I want to hear from you guys down in the comments on your thoughts on your new head coach. The Washington Commanders went out and made some hires. They've got a new head coach. They have cut ties with their offensive coordinator and brought in a new one. And there's a good bit to unpack here as Dan Quinn is now the Washington Commanders' new head coach. And I don't think this was the right hire because just like the Seahawks were defensively driven for the better part of the better part of the last 14 years, so have the Commanders with the very, small amount of identity that they do have. Don't you eventually want to be offensive? And I understand Dan Quinn coming over from the Cowboys, built a very great Cowboys defense over there. I'm not going to really give him a whole lot of the credit with the time he was with Atlanta, but we'll get into that in just a second. The defense was worse than the NFL last year. It was 32nd in yards and 32nd in points. So you can't get much worse than that. They've got some talent on both sides of the ball. Unfortunately, we did see them unload their defensive line at the trade deadline with a Chase Young, with a Montez Sweat, who both guys, I think equally are going to get some nice paydays. We know Montez Sweat was extended with the Bears, and it was an upgrade over Ron Rivera, no doubt. But don't you eventually want to be offensive in a league where, again, all of the elite teams in the NFL are offensive minded? And we can't call the Texans elite just yet. I don't think the Texans are an elite team just yet. And they do have a defensive-minded guy at head coach in D'Amico Ryans, a former player as well. But I don't like the Dan Quinn hire to the Washington Commanders. And again, you got to have baby steps. Maybe it's too much to ask him to flip it around and become offensively driven with a guy like Sam Howell who threw, 21 touchdowns, 21 interceptions. But I just wonder why another defensive-minded head coach hire who is unproven. He's 43-42 as a head coach. Kyle Shanahan, yes, I'm going to say it. Kyle Shanahan made those two Falcons teams as prolific as they were in 2016 and 2017, which we saw Kyle Shanahan give them the first best team in points, and the second best team in yards as well. But they didn't thrive under Dan Quinn's leadership once Kyle Shanahan went to be the offensive coordinator or head coach for the Niners. Dan Quinn went 14-23 once Kyle Shanahan left, and that was with a Steve Sarkisian, that was with a Dirk Cutter who was calling plays, and that includes the 0-5 goose egg before he got fired in 2020. And I understand He has played a major part in that Cowboys defense. We also saw that Cowboys defense give up 48 points in the last game that Dan Quinn was a defensive coordinator, but that's neither here nor there. The Cowboys defense is what it is now, and we know Jack Del Rio did what he could over the last few years, gave the Commanders a top 8, top 10 defense in terms of points and yards, I believe in 2022 and in 2020. But Washington hasn't had a top 10, top 15 offense, top 15. I'll even give them a little bit of slack. They haven't even been a middle of the pack offense in 7 years. Since 2017, they haven't had a top 10 offense in almost 10 years. It's 2024. Offense wins championships, not defense. Just like on Sunday, both great defenses are coming into the game. But what's going to decide who wins that game? Points and which offense can overcome the defense and be victorious. And again, baby steps. It might be asking a team a lot to turn their identity from what's been defensively minded for the last few years into offensively minded. They still have a heavy lift at the quarterback position. The roster overall can be a mostly heavy lift. Again, they do have some talent on that team. I like Terry McLaurin. I like Brian Robinson. I like Antonio Gibson, De'Ami Brown. We know some Jahan Dotson. We know some of the players that the Commanders present, but they're going to need to get better on that defensive side of the ball. I don't see Dan Quinn really winning more than 7 games with this franchise. Now, they only won 4 last year, and they've got that number 2 overall pick, which we're going to talk about on episode 65 on Friday. Could they actually be pushing into the Caleb Williams sweepstakes? I think they are, but I don't see this team winning any more than 7 games this year. I don't. Dan Quinn is 43-42 as a head coach. Yes, he went to a Super Bowl. Yes, his defense blew a 25-point lead. His offense was only prolific under Kyle Shanahan. Don't tell me he didn't have a good OC. Don't tell me that Steve Sarkisian, who is tearing it up with Texas right now, don't tell me that Dirk Cutter didn't have that offense where it needed to be, because I will say in that same breath, even with the defensive-minded guy in Dan Quinn, his offensive coordinators carried him to a better offense than what Arthur Smith had with the same offensive coordinator in the seasons that he was with the Atlanta Falcons. But I think Dan Quinn's going to bring some good leadership to this team. I think he's going to bring a bigger defensive prowess and experience as well. Again, you can't get much worse than literally the worst in the NFL in terms of points and yards. And we're going to get a more updated football mind over Ron Rivera as well. We're not going to what's it called? We're not going to get a 7-9, 8-8 average or standard, I feel like, that Ron Rivera established over the last few years, because we did see when things were right that Dan Quinn was able to make the Falcons a good team. But I'm still going to give most of that credit to the offensive coordinator, because again, he was 14-23 once Kyle Shanahan left, including an 0-5 stint that got him fired in 2020. But he's going to be a leader. He's going to a couple years before I still be in contention. But again, it's baby steps, and you got to do what you got to do. Now, a puzzling part of this, kind of a two-piece, but we'll start up front. Dan Quinn said Eric Bieniemy will not be returning to the staff. They go and hire Kliff Kingsbury as their next offensive coordinator. I don't really like the Kliff Kingsbury hire, but we'll get into that after this little stint about Eric Bieniemy. You just wonder, again, offensive coordinator under Andy Reid, and it could be the Pete Carmichael, Sean Payton thing where he just rode sidecar to the great head coach. Offensive coordinator under Andy Reid, working with Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill, being a part of that Chiefs dynasty that has had an elite offense really ever since, Patrick Mahomes came into the picture. Why did they pass on Eric Bieniemy as not only their next head coach, but even the sole fact of having just 1 year as their offensive coordinator? The only thing I can draw it to is the offense didn't take any jump under Eric Bieniemy's role. He stayed on par with the stats of about the last 5 years in terms of yards per game and points per game. And he had Sam Howell at quarterback, who gave you 3,900 yards and 21 touchdowns, but he also gave you 21 interceptions and had a lot of bad streaks this year. But again, first-year offensive coordinator. Maybe it got a little better in terms of efficiency. We saw the fact that they were able to put up, 30 plus on the Eagles each time, but it didn't feel like as much of a compliment when we saw that the Eagles were, I think, the not the only team worse, but they were the second worst team in the NFL in terms of points and yards, per game. And outside of Terry McLaurin, there wasn't any elite talent. They unloaded their defensive line at the trade deadline. They had the second worst defensive line in the NFL, which gave up 65 sacks. The New York Giants gave up 85 sacks. And Sam Howell was just getting the piss beat out of him. We've heard that, Eric Bieniemy doesn't interview the best. We're going to get more in-depth on EB in the next show. I could have made this a packed show, and it is still a packed show, but there's a couple of two-piece topics in here, and I wanted to save some of the meat and potatoes for them for Friday on episode 65. But Eric Bieniemy's got baggage. He had problems in Colorado when he was a player. He had problems going through the late 90s and the early 2000s, and it's kind of a shock that Eric Bieniemy is in the league right now. And again, I'll get into those details on Friday's show. And Dan Quinn came in and said, hey, I respect everything you've done. I know what you've done in this league, but your type of work is just not going to work here. It's not going to fit into our system. And he informed him that he wasn't he wasn't coming back. The Chargers and the Seahawks are the only open offensive coordinator positions right now that Eric Bieniemy could look into. And I think he'd be a great fit with either one of them. There's much more talent, much more quarterback play than he would have had here in Washington. And we know that the grass isn't always greener on the other side, but Lord, when you go from the dynasty of the NFL to one of the laughing stocks of the league over the last 20 years, arguably, and one of the worst teams we've seen over the last 5-6 years, especially under Ron Rivera's leadership, it's going to be hard. You're going to take a hit. Your talent's going to be less, and your numbers aren't going to be as great, which is going to spill over into your wins, which is what you get judged by. But if he's going to the Chargers, possibly, he does have that Justin Herbert, all of those offensive pieces in a Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, Mike Williams. Hopefully Quentin Johnston emerges. Not even going to mention the defense because that's going to be on lock with Harbaugh, and he's bringing over is it Jesse Minter from Michigan to be the defensive coordinator? And, even with the Seahawks as well, he'll have a Geno Smith, a DK Metcalf, a Tyler Lockett. He'll have some of that run game. He'll have the decency of that offensive line. I believe Eric Bieniemy does deserve another job in the NFL, maybe, depending on how people want to look at his background. Again, it's kind of a shock to me that he does have a job in the league, but my biggest knock on the NFL is they don't discipline the way that they should. But let's get into Kliff Kingsbury now being the new Commanders offensive coordinator, as he does go to USC for 1 year, get a little bit of tutelage with Caleb Williams, which has sparked some of the possible Caleb Williams to the Washington Commanders scenario, because we know Caleb doesn't want to go to the Bears. But again, we'll talk about that on episode 65. I think that's going to be a really nice topic for Friday. I'm not entirely sure if this was the right hire. We see him get the offensive coordinating job with the Commanders. Before that, he was with the USC. Before that, he was with the Arizona Cardinals. I think he was on his hot seat really about, by his second or third year. We see him exit there. And he really had no justification to get that job with the Arizona Cardinals, because he does have a college record of 35-40. He does have a head coaching record of 28-37 in the NFL, 35-40 in college football. He has 3 winning seasons in total in his coaching tenure. And, I'm just, it feels on brand with the Washington Commanders, because they're not the best people to hire. They're not going to bring in the necessarily the best talent. Look at the majority of their roster. Look at the positions that were just hired with this, round of the coaching cycle. But even further past his coaching tenures, we know he's given that credit for working with Patrick Mahomes, of course, working with Kyler Murray as well. But his offense was only in the tops of the league twice. That was in 2020 and 2021. He did do a solid job. But that Cardinals team was not nearly as talent stripped as this Washington Commanders team. 3 winning seasons in total for Kliff Kingsbury. He's supposed to be this new offensive mind, this new style of play, this Sean McVay effect. But he hasn't shown that. And yes, he did start, I think it was 10-0, 11-0 with the Cardinals. And I think they win 1 game down the stretch. They might have lost all their games down the stretch. I understand he was dealing with a hurt Kyler. I understand Kyler also tore his ACL. came back last year. But again, it's on brand with the Washington Commanders. But for a team that, they still got some heavy lifting to do. They did just get sold. Now it's a whole new regime here, offensive coordinator, head coach. Not talking about the defensive coordinator, just didn't really pique my interest enough to dive into that. Y'all roast me in the comments for it if you want. It's literally my show. But Kliff Kingsbury here, it's a good step in the right direction, I guess I'd say, because of what he has shown in his couple of years of NFL play calling experience for the offensive side of the ball. But we'll see how it plays out. I wasn't really a fan of any of these moves here. I didn't like the Dan Quinn hire. I didn't like the Kliff Kingsbury hire as offensive coordinator. But I want to hear from y'all down in the chat, down in the comments. This has been episode 64 of the NFL with AJL. I appreciate everybody jumping into the show tonight. Again, you could have been anywhere else in the world, but you're right here tapped in with me on the show. Y'all, please make sure to like the stream. Hit the bell on YouTube as well so you never miss a post. Again, we've got almost 40 subs since last Tuesday. We need about another 170, and I will officially be making money off of the show. It's because of you guys, the community, the support I have from my awesome lady Taylor, from my family around me, from my friends. I appreciate everyone backing me on this because y'all know it's not easy, whether you create content, whether you have a podcast, whatever it is. Y'all make sure to subscribe on YouTube, please, and thank you. QR code there will give you every bit of social media and podcast content at the NFL with AJL. Hashtag the NFL with AJL. And if you want to drop a super chat or a super thanks down in the comments, you can to donate directly to the podcast, or you can get at me on social media. If you have my personal information, you can hit me up as well to donate to the show. Of course, you don't have to, but it's always appreciated. No donation is, of course, too small or definitely too big. And as always, we're sponsored by Buy and Sell with AJL for all your worldwide professional real estate needs, whether you're looking to buy a home, sell a home, or invest in real estate. Buy and Sell with AJL is the real estate team that you need on your side. You can drop your email in the comments, get at them on social media, handle down below to get on their exclusive real estate newsletter to give you the true nitty-gritty of the real estate market. And you can get implemented on some AI that they've put in the business as well that really benefits their buyers and sellers, turning clients into family by prioritizing people over transactions, or as we do know it, people over profit. Y'all make sure to get at us on all social media platforms as we get into the Who Dat Corner here on the NFL with AJL, episode 64. The Saints are leaning closer to restructuring Derek Carr's contract. And I can't say I'm surprised, because all this team does is get a doctorate's degree and kicking the can down the road and being over the cap every single freaking year. And the same old song and dance is getting pretty irritating. I went back and looked when we were going to restructure Derek Carr's contract, when, I asked the question, y'all reacted to it on the channel. I was pretty harsh on Derek Carr. I was. The Saints were 11th in passing yards this year. Derek Carr led the NFL in touchdown passes over the last 4 or 5 seasons. But, or not 4 or 5 seasons, 4 or 5 games of the season. But Derek Carr wasn't playing great defenses. Derek Carr wasn't the best decision maker with the New Orleans Saints. And for us to come in and restructure his deal to kick this can down the road is something that I'm not interested in. And I told you guys that on the last episode, or not last episode, on the last video when I talked about Derek Carr's contract. What exactly is it going to look like if the Saints do restructure? His contract would effectively become guaranteed through 2025. They're likely going to restructure with him this offseason, which will bring the team much-needed salary cap relief while tying themselves closer to the quarterback. He currently has a salary cap hit of $35.7 million, highest on the team. Obviously so, he's the quarterback. A standard restructure will reduce his already guaranteed base salary from $30 million to the veterans minimum, which I think is around $1 million, maybe a little more now that, inflation is what it is and the NFL is an ever-growing business. And pay the difference out as a signing bonus, which is prorated over the next 5 years. That lowers his cap hit down to about $12.6 million in 2024, which will save us $23 million this year, which is very ideal. We're still dead last in the NFL in cap space. I think we were around 85 to 90 million over or in the red in terms of cap space. But apparently this, according to this article, Yahoo Sports, this was the plan all along, committing to Derek Carr with heavy guarantees through his first 2 years. Apparently, that's how the Saints were able to lure him in with more guaranteed money instead of, say, the New York Jets or the Carolina Panthers, which I think it's safe to say Derek Carr landed in a, much better situation. The Jets were out there saying that Derek Carr was a future Hall of Famer, which I would beg to differ there, even with him being my quarterback, and y'all know I'm a big fan. But even with this Derek Carr restructure, the Saints would still be in the red by more than $60 million after restructuring. The Saints would still be higher over the cap by a higher figure than any other team. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done to get below the cap, but with the Saints already being in cap hell, signing a bad contract for Derek Carr, they were naturally going to have to restructure, and that's why that was my issue from the jump. $150 million for a guy that's peaked with the guy with the franchise that believed in him. I'm just saying. I wasn't the biggest fan of the move. Now, let's get to the downside of restructuring Derek Carr's contract. Not only will he be here longer, because I was hoping it was 2023 and 2024, but his cap charge in 2025, which is 45.7, and 2026, which is 55.7, go even higher, increasing by about $5.7 million in each year. So let's just say, for conversation's sake, it's going to cost us about another $12 million to keep him longer. Because that money was already guaranteed, it's just paid out differently, really, for accounting purposes in the NFL. It's more difficult to get out of his contract later on. What the hell do you know? Kicking the can down the road with another bad contract, and it's going to make it harder to get out of it. This is why the Saints can't convince me right now that they want to win football games. They can't convince me that it's enough of a priority to bring the right guys in, because you sign contracts like this and then you restructure contracts like this to stay in the red of the cap just so you can't go sign talent. That's why we lost C.J. Gardner-Johnson. It's why we lost Marcus Williams. It's why we lost Trey Hendrickson. It's why we lost David Onyemata, Caden Ellis. It's why we've lost those key players over the last couple of years, because we signed Marshawn Lattimore and Alvin Kamara and horrible Michael Thomas and Derek contract deals. And then for some reason, we keep bringing them back or restructuring them. Kamara and Lattimore deserve it. Michael Thomas and Derek Carr don't. MT, I love you, bro. I love the 1,700-yard season that you had. I love the fact that you have the most catches in a season in NFL history. I love that. You broke Marvin Harrison's record. But I think you've played 15, 16 games over the last few seasons. Y'all fire off on me in the comments, because I know that wasn't 100% accurate, but we know Michael Thomas hasn't been playing over the last few years. And the thing is, if Derek Carr doesn't get any better, it's going to fall back on Mickey Loomis, which it already does. We're going to be looking at Dennis Allen, which we already do. But even if we release Derek Carr, that's what I'm about to start calling him because it's so bad. Releasing Derek Carr before the contract expires would accelerate all of those $5.7 million signing bonus payouts into the current year rather than stretching it out over time. So either way, the money's going to get paid. You just have to decide when you're going to possibly cut him. But even if you look further out, if he's on the roster by March 17th of next year, 2025, then his $30 million salary for that season will become fully guaranteed. So if the Saints didn't want to pay more, which they're already wrapped into it, they'd have to move off of him. And barring that we draft our quarterback of the future this year, who would they have waiting in the ballots? It's just a horrible domino effect for my team, and I'm going to be here for it. I'm going to be, not necessarily down for it, but I'm going to be in it, through the thick and the thin. This is what it's about with being a fan. But let's say that the Saints do restructure him, which of course is what expected. That's what Mickey Loomis does. It puts his 2025 cap hit at more than $51.4 million. Then they're basically going to have to make a decision next year on whether they want to cut him. Salary cap's going to get him either way, or restructure him again, which, knowing Mickey Loomis, he's going to pursue another doctorate in restructuring NFL contracts. And we're going to continue to look and wonder and think why the Sean Payton era is still here. It's not working. We knew Derek Carr was going to be on the Saints roster for this year and painfully next year as well. And I'll continue to stand on business about it. We should make Derek Carr the highest paid clipboard holder in NFL history. He's hit his ceiling We're going to talk about Clint Kubiak here next, but I don't believe, even if I'm not going to say, a top offensive mind like Ben Johnson or Frank Smith or Kyle Shanahan came into the Saints and they couldn't make Derek Carr better, but he's already peaked. The Saints aren't going anywhere with this guy. He's going to be here through 2025. His current deal right now runs out in 2027. What is he being going to be at this point? There's a new offensive coordinator more than likely coming in. We'll pivot over into that now. Just know that I'm not happy about this Derek Carr restructure because it's kicking the can down the road to keep him with us. And the money, which was already horribly written up front, is just going to be drawn out longer. It's just going to be drawn out longer. I guess the Saints really believe in this Derek Carr regime because I don't. Again, Miss Benson, Mr. Loomis, Dennis Allen. You don't get the respect of being called Mr. Allen. That's just a little petty. Y'all can't convince me you want to win football games. Continue to be comfortable. Continue to do what you've been doing. Just keep doing what you're doing. Yeah, just keep doing that, and we'll see what the Saints franchise is in a couple of seasons. But on a brighter note, the New Orleans Saints are closing in on their next offensive coordinator, hopefully, as Clint Kubiak, the 49ers passing game coordinator, is on the radar for the New Orleans Saints, and it's all but confirmed, as even Wikipedia has Clint Kubiak as the New Orleans Saints offensive coordinator, but they didn't specifically put the hire date. They're just assuming that he's going to be brought in. And the deal can't be finalized until the Super Bowl is over, so that's why the Saints have not went on and signed him yet. But just a little look at, Clint Kubiak's history: 2010 and 11, offensive quality control coach at A&M, grad assistant for an A&M in 2012, Minnesota Vikings 2013 and 14, offensive quality control again. Stop at Kansas in 2015 for a wide receivers coach. Denver Broncos offensive assistant through 16 through 18. Minnesota Vikings quarterback coach 2019 and 20, offensive coordinator in 21, Broncos passing game coordinator and quarterbacks coach in 2022, which we know how horribly the Broncos were in 2022. Excuse me. And the San Francisco 49ers passing game coordinator in 2023. At least we're chasing an offensive-minded guy for the position, a guy that's had a lot of experience and as of, even as of recently is with a great team like the San Francisco 49ers. Niners offense was second in yards, third in points, fourth in pass yards per game, and second in the NFL in passing touchdowns. So the Saints have their eyes on the right guy. They really do. You can see he began his career as a Broncos offensive assistant under his father, Gary Kubiak, in 2016. And when he was the offensive coordinator in 2021 for the Vikings, they finished 12th in total offense and 14th in scoring offense. So 12th in yards, 14th in points. So, not horrible, but Clint Kubiak didn't stay on the staff after Mike Zimmer was fired prior to the 2022 year. Enter Kevin O'Connell and, all the remarkable things that he's done over with the Minnesota Vikings. My only concern is I'm hoping the Saints didn't jump the gun here because it's like I was saying earlier, and I said we were going to address it later on in the show. Whenever you're on a staff, I won't even necessarily say players get as much credit, but when you're on a elite winning staff like with the Ravens or 49ers or the Chiefs, you're going to get a lot of credit. But this guy's been an offensive coordinator for 1 year. It was under Minnesota in 2021. Not horrible, about middle of the pack. And he was a passing game coordinator for 1 year with the San Francisco 49ers, who have one of the best front offices and coaching staffs in the NFL. It's kind of like we talk about Brock Purdy being that system quarterback. Jimmy Garoppolo was just about as good. Brock Purdy is clearly better. But the system is built to have you succeed. And that's not a knock. But I don't know if it's a matter of can Brock Purdy and, for this conversation's sake, Clint Kubiak overcome dysfunction? Because we have some of that here in New Orleans. Let's just call it what it is. Dennis Allen is still going to be his head coach. I pray Dennis Allen turns play calling duties over to Clint Kubiak, and I'm all but 100% sure that he will. But I just hope the Saints didn't jump the gun again for a guy that's only been an OC for 1 year. And, outside of being some quality control coaches here and there, yes, he did get to, coach alongside of Kyle Shanahan, which has got to feel great. He's, in the same vicinity as, Kyle Shanahan, as Steve Wilks. So that is a very positive takeaway there. But more than anything, I want to see more play action out of this offense. Derek Carr is one of the best play action passers in terms of completion percentage in the NFL. He's one of the greatest third down, one of the best third down play action passers in his career. I want him to coach Derek Carr out of the hero/frustrated throws. Oh, I'm throwing check down after check down after pass after pass. I'm going to just heave one downfield. We saw him do that to Rashid Shaheed, Chris Olave, Michael Thomas a couple times this year. We saw him do that. And I want him to coach Derek Carr out of those, also hero throws as well. He only threw 2 pick sixes this year, painfully enough. I was in the stadium when he threw both of them. One in New Orleans against the Jags and another one in Atlanta against the Falcons. But I'm really hoping he can coach Derek Carr out of these hero throws, out of these frustration throws, and open this offense back up with the creativity that we saw in, yes, I do want to move on from the Sean Payton era, but that Sean Payton spoiled us on. Those great passing yards per game, the schemes, the passing touchdowns, the offensive efficiency, the capability. Show me that you are not suffering from ineptitude with this offense, because that is the vibe the Saints gave me. Yes, again, Derek Carr led the league in passing touchdowns over the last 4 or 5 weeks, and the Saints were 11th in passing offense in the year, which doesn't even feel like it because we played like a 9-8 football team. We played like one, arguably worse at certain times. I'm not necessarily excited that we played well against bad defense over the last quarter of the year. We did what we were supposed to do because we also have seen the Saints play down to their competition. But I'm hoping, like I said with Dennis Allen, maybe this is a new regime. Maybe this is a new identity, not a pop gun offense. We can bring in some players. Not the case over 2 years. Not the case at all. And I'm hoping with Clint Kubiak going to be hired, that this offense can open back up, be more creative, utilize your stars, get your role players in there more effectively, use Rashid Shaheed more effectively, put Jimmy Graham in for more than 15 targets a year, 6 catches, 4 touchdowns, use Chris Olave some more, get Kamara more creative in space, get Taysom Hill on more than just quarterback draws and quarterback powers. Give me some better decision-making and situational offense, especially in the red zone, because we know that's where Derek Carr struggles the most. If he can get Derek Carr to be more efficient and have better decision-making in the red zone and just overall situationally for this offense, the Saints will be in a good position because we know the Saints struggled in the red zone last year. And if you can't convert when you get down to the red zone, you're going to live by the field goal, but you're also going to die by the field goal when you do not get those points. So I think it's going to be a good hire for Clint Kubiak to come in as a Saints offensive coordinator. I'm very excited for this. And if for some reason he has a crazy offensive outing, if the Niners have a crazy offensive outing, Saints fans are going to be even more excited. And it's going to be good to get some fresh eyes, a fresh spirit, some fresh legs, for lack of better words, in here for the Saints offensive coordinator position. Feels like that show really flew by, guys. That was episode 64 of the NFL with AJL. I appreciate everybody jumping into the show tonight. Again, you could have been anywhere else in the world, but you're right here tapped in with me, and you were tapped in with me on the show. As always, before we get out of here, please make sure to like and share the stream wherever you may be watching. Subscribe on YouTube, hit the bell so you never miss a post. At the NFL with AJL, hashtag the NFL with AJL on all social media platforms. If you would like to drop a super chat or a super thanks, that would be fantastic. You'll donate directly to the show. Let's keep running up those subs. Again, I'm about 170 subs away from being able to get monetized on this platform, which will just be a domino effect for everything going outwards. Y'all pray for me. Y'all pray for the lady and I as we are still on the hunt for our cat, Java. Again, we've seen her 2 of the last 3 nights on our cameras, and honestly going to be pulling an all-nighter tonight so I can make sure that I can bring her in, because we want her to be back home so bad, and she is naturally an inside cat. But enough of the transparency about my life. I know y'all come here for the sports takes, but you also know that's how we are on the show as well. We'll be back on Friday with episode 65, a little more Super Bowl talk. As always, I love y'all. I need y'all, and I will see you guys in the next